I never thought silence could feel so loud until I began living inside it. From the outside, my life looked complete, a settled routine, familiar walls, and conversations that followed predictable paths. But inside me, something had gone quiet long before I noticed it. Days passed like pages turned without being read, and nights arrived with a heaviness I could never explain. I told myself this was adulthood, that comfort often replaced excitement, that stability came at the cost of feeling deeply. Still, there were moments when I stood near the window and wondered when I had last felt truly seen. That was when you entered my awareness, not dramatically, not suddenly, but gently, like a change in weather you only notice after it has already happened. At first, it was nothing more than shared space and polite words. Ordinary moments, harmless moments. We spoke about trivial things, about days that felt long and nights that ended too soon. There was no intention behind those conversations, no hidden meaning. Or at least, that is what I told myself. What I did not expect was the comfort, the ease, the strange calm that settled over me whenever you were near. It felt like stepping into a familiar room I did not remember entering before. I laughed more easily. I listened more carefully. For the first time in a long while, I felt present. That alone should have warned me, but loneliness has a way of blinding reason. I noticed the small things, the way time seemed to slow, the way silence between us never felt awkward. Even when nothing was said, something was being shared. I began carrying those moments with me, replaying them in my mind during the quiet hours. I told myself it was harmless appreciation, nothing more than kindness mistaken for connection. Yet deep down, something had shifted. I felt it in the way my thoughts returned to you uninvited, in the way my heart responded before my mind could intervene. I tried to ignore it, to bury it beneath responsibility and routine. But emotions do not disappear simply because they are inconvenient. By the end of that season, I sensed it clearly, something had begun to grow. Not loudly, not visibly, but steadily, and even then, I knew it had taken root where it should never have been allowed to exist. Once awareness arrives, denial becomes exhausting. I tried to keep my distance, to remind myself of boundaries that should never blur. Yet the more I resisted, the more my thoughts betrayed me. I began to notice how often I waited, for a word, a moment, a shared glance that meant more than it should have. What frightened me most was not the feeling itself, but how natural it felt. I started justifying things quietly. I told myself emotional connection was not betrayal, that understanding another person did not mean crossing a line. But guilt has a way of whispering truths we refuse to hear. I felt it in the pauses, in the hesitation before speaking, in the way my heart raced over the smallest interactions. I was no longer unaware. I was choosing. At night, I questioned myself relentlessly. I asked when appreciation became attachment, when comfort turned into longing. I wondered how something that felt so gentle could also feel so wrong. The conflict lived inside me constantly, desire pulling one way, conscience pulling another. Neither side willing to surrender. You never said anything that crossed a line. Neither did I. And yet, the space between us grew heavy with what remained unspoken. It was in that unspoken space that everything dangerous lived. Every look held too long. Every silence filled with meaning. Every moment that felt stolen simply because it existed. I became someone I did not recognize, careful with words, restless in stillness, divided in spirit. I hated myself for feeling this way, yet I could not deny the truth anymore. I was emotionally somewhere I did not belong. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I feared consequences, but because I understood what I was risking. Integrity, trust, the quiet promises that form the foundation of a life. I stood at a crossroads with no clear path forward, knowing that even choosing to step back would leave a mark. By the end of this chapter, One truth was undeniable. What had begun as something innocent had become something dangerous. And I was no longer pretending otherwise. There comes a moment when avoidance fails, when emotions demand to be acknowledged. For me, it arrived quietly, without drama or confrontation. It was a simple moment, a conversation that lingered too long, a silence that spoke too loudly. In that instant, everything I had been denying stood before me, undeniable and heavy. I realized then that love does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives disguised as understanding, as familiarity, as comfort. And that made it more terrifying. Because how do you fight something that feels like home? I questioned my character, my values, my sense of self. I asked whether feeling deeply made me weak, or human, or selfish. I wondered if love could be wrong simply because of where it grows. The answers offered no comfort, only clarity. That night, I admitted the truth, to myself, if to no one else. I named the feeling I had avoided. I accepted its existence without acting on it. And that restraint felt heavier than any confession. Because loving quietly, without permission or future, is its own kind of suffering. I imagined the damage that could unfold if I allowed this feeling to guide me. The people who would be hurt. The trust that would be broken. The version of myself I would lose forever. That understanding became my anchor, the one thing strong enough to keep me from falling further. Yet even restraint carried pain. Because choosing not to cross a line did not erase the longing. It only transformed it into something silent and aching. I learned that self-control does not eliminate desire, it only teaches you how to carry it. In that moment, the story reached its peak. Not with action, but with realization. Not with chaos, but with acceptance. I knew then that love had bloomed in the wrong place, and that knowing alone would change me forever. Distance followed naturally, as it always does when truth becomes too heavy to share. Conversations shortened. Silences grew longer. What once felt effortless now required intention. And slowly, carefully, I stepped back. Not because the feeling faded, but because I understood the cost of letting it live unchecked. There was grief in that distance. Grief for something that never truly existed, yet felt deeply real. I mourned the version of life where circumstances were different, where love did not arrive with rules and consequences. But reality does not bend for longing. It simply asks us to choose who we will be. With time, reflection replaced restlessness. I understood that some connections enter our lives not to stay, but to reveal something missing within us. This love showed me the parts of myself that needed attention, honesty, and healing. It was never meant to be lived, it was meant to be learned from. I no longer resent the feeling. I respect it, because it taught me restraint, self-awareness, and the courage to walk away from something beautiful but wrong. That choice did not make me strong overnight, but it made me honest. Now, when I think back, I see it clearly. Love did bloom where it should never have grown. And because of that, it had to be left behind. Not forgotten, but understood. Some loves exist only to remind us of who we are, and who we must choose to be. Answer: the story ends not with regret, but with quiet acceptance. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let go of a feeling before it destroys everything else you hold dear.